Hello everybody, I am Dr. Sonali Pawar from Dada Patil College, Karjat. This is my video lecture on the poem Background Casually, and the topic is Background Casually as an autobiographical poem. This is meant for BA and MA Special English students. The reference I used in this video lecture is New Indian English Poets and Poetry, the book written by Dr. Raghukull Tilak. Now friends, we would turn to the introduction of this poem as well as poet first. Background Casually is an autobiographical poem written by Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel is an outstanding poet of post-independent India. Actually, he was a Jew by birth, but he made India his home. Background Casually is an autobiographical poem in which he has expressed in very truthful and faithful words his commitment to India. At the same time, Nissim Ezekiel reflects failures and achievements of the poet in this poem. This long poem is divided into 3 sections. Each section contains 5 stanzas of 5 lines each. At the very beginning, the poet expressed his love for India in these words. See, I am not a Hindu and my background makes me a natural outsider. Circumstances and decisions relate me to India. In other countries, I am a foreigner. In India, I am an Indian. In these words, he explained in very truthful words, in very faithful words, that though he is not Hindu or Indian by birth, but he has made India his home, and in India he accepted, he feels that he is an Indian. So Nissim Ezekiel is rightly called by the critics as he is a very Indian poet writing in English. In his number of poems, very famous poems, he has expressed his commitment to depict Indian life faithfully. His love for India and particularly for the city of Mumbai is expressed very faithfully in his poems. And this poem is also not an exception to it. Now see, after the beginning stanza, the poet turns to the record of his background. Now we will go through in detail background of the poet, as the name suggests, background casually. In the first part of the poem, the poet explains his childhood, what kind of child he was in his childhood. The poet begins in a tone of light banter, criticism. He calls himself a poet, rascal, clown, a frightened child who would neither sleep nor eat. His childhood was so frightful that whether in a relaxing period of childhood, he cannot sleep or eat carelessly or very peacefully. He was lean and thin, rather sickly, a boy of meager bone. All these mental kind of tensions affect his physical growth, and so he is a boy of meager bone in his childhood. He was not good at games and such as form the usual pastime of a normal healthy boy. He cannot manage with the other children in India. He cannot manage their games in his childhood. That is actually natural to the children, but it was not natural with Nissim Ezekiel in his childhood. He could not fly a kite. Flying a kite is a very ordinary game. All the children play in their childhood, but it is not possible. He cannot learn how to fly kite properly. He could not fly a kite, and poking fun at his own expense, the poet says that he had no top of his own. And when he borrowed it from some other boy, top, bhura, some other boy, he failed to spin it. it was a failure all round. Means in childhood, from his early childhood, he was a total failure. And this thing at the beginning of the poem, Nissim Ezekiel very faithfully accepted. Now see, we will turn to his hardships at school. We have seen that how he was frightened child in his childhood, as he was not normal in his mental growth as well as physical growth. He was a total failure in his childhood. The causes are also explained through the poem itself. Now see how he explains the hardships at school. Nissim Ezekiel was not a Hindu, but he was a Jew. He had to face, because of all those things, he has to face many hardships at school. He was sent to a Roman Catholic school where he was ill-treated by Christian boys. Roman Catholic school was there in India, in Mumbai, but most of the children were the Christian boys, and they ill-treated this boy because he was a Jew. Why the English people, why the Christian boys people hate the Jews? See, that is also explained further. For it were the Jews, his people, who had betrayed Christ. According to Christian people, it was Jew who betrayed Christ. Because of these Jew people, their God has to suffer, and so they hate Jews. He was a mugging Jew among those wolves. They were Christians, but they knew no Christian charity. As the Christian religion teaches us to have charity with the other people, particularly the helpless people. But according to Nissim Ezekiel, even the children, not the elders one, not only the elders, but children also knew no Christian charity, though they were Christian by the religion. But ironically enough, it was this hated Jew, that is Nissim Ezekiel, and not one of the Christian boys, who won the scripture prize. Reciting the religious books is also a very important phenomenon in Indian schools. And in such competition, scripture reciting competition, he won the scripture prize, and not a Christian boy can be successful in winning this prize. So Nissim Ezekiel says that I proved there that I am best than the Christian boys, thus showing that he was better read in the Christian scriptures than the Christians themselves. But this joy was short-lived, because he can overcome the Christian boys. But in India, there is a diversity of religions, and so he has to face so many hardships in the school from various religions having boys. We are told in the very next line that a Muslim boy boxed his ears. Means after having the smooth relationship with the Christians, or after overcoming the Christian boys, Nissim Ezekiel has to face hardships because of the Muslim boys in the same school. A lone Jew, he was ill-treated both by Muslims and the Christians. So, henceforth, Muslim boys along with Christian boys started quarreling with this small Jew boy. This does not mean that Hindus were very friendly with this boy. Hindus were equally unkind. They were great bullies, because this India belongs to the Hindus according to them, and so they are great bullies. They were undernourished, but they were strong. They were poor, but they know very well that this is our country and these are the guests in our country. They does not belong to our country. So though they were undernourished, they were bullies. They were strong, and they terrorized the poor Jew. Strong mentally, strong from the background, strong. They have the support from the other elder people, even perhaps the school management. So they were strong in that sense, and they bullied, they terrorized the poor Jew, that is our Nissim Ezekiel. He too looked down upon them, for their prepositions were always wrong. They were dullards, and they were inactive and lazy. As these Muslim, Christian and Hindu boys are in enmity with this Jew boy, Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel also has no any kind relationship or the kind feelings for all these people. He also looked down upon them because of their poor English, and this thing we can notice in his poems also, like Goodbye Party for Miss Pushpa T.S., in which he has criticized the Indian way of using English wrongly. Okay, that is not our today's topic. So let us come back to our original poem, Background Casually. So he looked down upon the Hindu boys for their prepositions, for their wrong prepositions, because they were dullards, they were inactive and lazy in learning. One day there was a noisy quarrel and the boy poet had to use his knife to defend himself. Slowly, he learns to defend himself, and because of that, he has to make quarrels with all these boys, particularly Hindu, Muslim and the Christian boys, and he has given the record of his hardships because of his Jew religion at school. In this way, he has recorded how he was ill-treated by Christian, Muslim and Hindu boys in the school. Further, after schooling, the poet says that they wanted to make him a rabbi. His teachers or his parents, they wanted him to make a rabbi. A rabbi means a Jewish priest. But a bit of self-analysis showed him that his morals had declined and that he was not worthy of the noble profession. He was not a very good religious zeal having boy. He has at all no religious zeal. So he found out that he cannot be a rabbi. He is not worthy of that noble profession. On Friday nights, there were prayers at home, and he was thus made aware of his own wickedness. He heard the preaching of Hindu yogis and of Jewish priests, but nothing could make him better and nobler. He had no religious zeal at all, not only about Christian. That was another part that he won the scriptures prize, but he had no religious zeal. He never interested in Hindu, Muslim or Christian religion or their religious activities. So he rejected to be a rabbi, that is a Jewish priest, after his schooling. Then time passed and school days were over, and at the age of 22 he was sent to England for higher study. There, with the help of a family friend who paid the fare. Actually, he had just paid the fare. All the other expenses he has to manage on his own in the unknown area of London. The life in London also he has given in detail in this poem. See how? In lines which have become famous and which are frequently quoted, he tells us that in London, philosophy, poverty, poetry. See these three P's, philosophy, poverty, poetry. These were his three companions, and they shared his basement room. He had one basement room there, and he loved that basement room because he has no any trouble from other Christian boys or the other very good kind of boys whom they suggest themselves so he has no trouble from others in his basement room, and so he feels that philosophy, poverty and poetry, these are the three companions in London who shared his basement room. He had actually lived for some time in a basement room in London and had found it immensely good and hospitable. It was from here that he had observed the outside world with zeal and interest. The image of the basement room recurs in a number of his poems further. So, we have seen that his life in London, his basement room and his three companions, philosophy, poverty and poetry, all these things made him happy for some time, but actually he was there for learning purpose. And what about his education in London? It was a total failure in youth also. He lived in London for 2 years all alone, a hard and cheerless life because he was penniless. He has to work hard for money, and further he has to study again hard. He had no any companion in the form of male company or the female company also, you can say, without participating actively in the life that went around him. So he cannot participate actively because of his Jew religion, because of his inferiority complex, and his life in London also becomes all alone, hard and cheerless for him. At last he realized the bitter truth that he was a failure. At last he has to accept that in his youth that he is a total failure, and decided to return to India. As he was too poor to pay his fare. At the beginning, his family friend has managed to give his fare to London. He has managed to live in London, but how to return back? He was too poor to pay his fare. He worked then as a manual servant on an English cargo ship carrying French guns and mortar shell to Indochina. Now see, today we know Nissim Ezekiel as a very great poet, Indian poet writing in English. He was famous. He is famous all over in the world because of his very wonderful poems. But we can see here that he also has to face failure. He also has to face he has to work hard to prove his identity, isn't it? So he has to do manual work as a servant on English cargo ship. He did the manual work of scrubbing the ship. See which kind of work he has done? Manual job of scrubbing the ship. But he felt quite happy and at ease. Thus he returned to India a total failure. He had studied a bit of philosophy of no use to him in life, and thus his studies merely increased his confusion and perplexity. Actually, he has gone there to study philosophy, but he becomes unsuccessful because he feels that philosophy has no use in his practical life. He faced with the problem of adjusting himself to the circumstances. His background was the main hurdle in his study, in his development as a writer and as a student also, making the best of his opportunities. He did not know what to do and how to feel at home. Then, in the best tradition of the westernized Indians like Niraj C. Chaudhary and V.S. Naipaul, there is an indictment of the Hindus. All Hindus are like that. My father used to say, when someone talked too loudly. Now, see, in his family or in his Jewish community also, the people hate the others who hate themselves, who hate them. All Hindus are like that. My father used to say, when someone talked too loudly or knocked at the door like the devil, they hawked and spat, they sprawled around. All the Indians are like that, they all hate us, the Jews. This was the opinion of all the Jews in India. But in spite of all such difficulties, the poet has remained attached to the country of his choice, that is India, and to the city Bombay, which he has made his home. In the course of time, he committed the worst possible folly, that is, he married. After marriage also, he cannot adjust himself, he cannot settle in his life. So, his marriage was also worst one. Since then, he has frequently changed his jobs. After marriage, he has to earn and he cannot adjust in one and single job. So, he has to change the jobs to earn his living. Such has been his past, his background of which he sings, but he knows that much more still remains to be sung. In the middle of their youth, in the middle of their young age, description of young age, suddenly he remembers his past. He must also sing of his ancestry and early experiences of a child. He wants to share with the readers his own ancestry of oil pressing caste. He tells us that his ancestors belonged to the Saturday oil pressing caste, popularly called in India as Shanwar Telis. He was in this way that they earned their living. He remembers even the hooded bullock whom he used to observe as a child, which went round and round moving. It was also a manual work his ancestors has to do, and he remembers it, which he has seen in his childhood. Round and round moving the oil seeding crushing machine. Again, he shared with the readers one of his very unhappy childhood memories. See, what is it? He is also reminded of a major in the British Army who told them frightening stories of the Boer War in Africa. And such stories frightened the child Nissim. Actually, we have seen that he was a frightened child in his childhood. And again, with such fearful stories, he becomes so much frightened of such frightening stories in his childhood. He would have frightening dreams then in his childhood. For example, he would dream that fierce man had bound his hand and feet. Such fearful dreams he has in his childhood, which is in general called as very happy childhood. But Nissim Ezekiel has passed his childhood in very frightened condition, in very insecure condition. But now, as a grown-up man and poet, he dreams only of words. He did not realize that words can be trained. Words can be trained. He continued to write poems till he had lost his grip on reality and so missed his worldly prize. Means he started his career in writing poetry particularly. Devotion to his chosen calling made him a failure in the worldly sense. Given another opportunity, he would not repeat this folly. At the beginning of his career as a poet, he becomes again as a failure because he tried the themes which are not his day-to-day experiences, which are not a part of his own life. So he becomes a failure in the early stage of his career as a poet. Then, even now, despite all bitterness and disappointment, he tries to cultivate greater clarity of vision, to have a better understanding of life and its problems, and to continue to serve the cause of poetry as well as he can. Then he understood that he has to deal with his daily experiences, his own life as a Jew. He has to deal with that original experiences in his poetry. He has to share his experiences with his readers, which can give him some kind of excitement, some kind of very satisfaction as a poet. And then from that stage, he finds himself as a poet. He becomes popular, he becomes famous as a poet. Others may consider him a fool, but wisdom consists in making the best of one's opportunities. The people tease him. What are you writing in your poems? Why are you writing so and so? But he was very faithful to his opportunities, to his experiences. He therefore makes the best use of both inner and outer storms. As we have seen, he was a failure in childhood, he was a failure in his career, he was a failure in his married life, in his studies, in his youth. So he started expressing his inner tensions, inner and outer, both these storms in his poetry. He expresses in his poetry his inner tensions, passions and frustrations, as well as the failures and difficulties that life has in store for him as a Jew. Such personal experiences constitute the theme of his poetry. So, further, we can feel that though the Indians, Hindus, Muslims, Christians ill-treated him, he also feels that there is somewhere India. I have the date of India because I am living in India. I earn my livelihood in India. I managed to study. I managed to live. I managed to earn here in India. And so he started expressing his commitment towards India, his home country. He is totally committed to his chosen profession, poetry. In the same manner, he is committed to the country of his choice and particularly to the city of Bombay, which he has made his home. The climate is too hot for him. Indian and actually Mumbai's atmosphere was too hot for the European, for the outsiders, for the Western people. It sears his eyes. But his foreign friends who visit him or those who write to him from abroad are surprised that he has managed to survive in the heat and squalor of India. They become astonished to see that how this man can manage in India, its worst heat and squalor. And they really appreciate Mr. Ezekiel for that. Such friends exaggerate the difficulties as he was born, brought up, and settled in India. He has to adjust. It is his day-to-day part of life. So, according to him, my friends exaggerate the atmosphere of India, but I don't feel that it is impossible to learn in India. However, it may be he has become a part and parcel of India further. He is proud of his Indian environment. He started loving India. He has made his commitment. India is his home and he will continue to live in his chosen home. He has kept his commitment by depicting life faithfully as he finds it in the city of Bombay. He has not shown any craze for visiting foreign countries. Instead, his poetry has acted as a mirror for reflecting life as it is actually lived in this backward place that is India. He has written a number of poems on the Indian life that goes on around him. Bombay is realistically and feelingly depicted in a number of his poems. In this way, he started expressing his commitment to depict Indian life faithfully through his poems. So let us turn to our conclusion. Background Casually is a poem, is a fine autobiographical poem where the poet describes his own life from childhood to youth. He dwells on his background, both temporal and spatial, and he also expressed his failure and achievement as a great poet further. He expressed his commitment to India, particularly the city of Bombay, and also the poetry in this poem, Background Casually. So, we can safely say that Background Casually is a fine autobiographical poem in which Nissim Ezekiel has expressed his commitment to India. Thank you.